Welcome here, everybody. Welcome to another incredible episode of the Contractor Business Builder podcast. We've got a special guest today, Tim Fairley. He's the founder of Construct IQ. How are you doing today, Tim?
Good, good. It's cool to be on here.
Yeah, definitely. I'm really excited for our talk today, and we're going to be talking all things project management, how to manage projects better, some of your experience, and you've helped a lot of students and people over the years as well with improving their project management. Can you tell us me a little bit about yourself and the
Yeah,
work that you do?
yeah. So I guess my journey started maybe 7 or 8 years ago, where I got a graduate job at a major construction company, having studied electrical engineering, and even in my first job, I felt that what I'd studied at uni wasn't relevant at all to what I was doing in work. Like, they were just completely different. So I guess you go from studying like a technical engineering degree, learning about circuits, and then I moved on to working for a major construction company where it's all about estimates, schedules, contracts, and building things. And I just felt this massive gap in my knowledge. And I remember I had this one moment with like a manager of mine who, like, I was working in estimating, and he explained what estimating was, and he drew this diagram on the board and he showed me, these are your direct costs, these are your indirect costs. Your direct costs are made up of subcontractors, materials, plant, labor. And it just blew my mind that in like 20 minutes, you could learn more about like how to do your job than I'd learned at my whole
Mhm.
experience at uni. And
Yeah.
so I guess from there, I started looking like, oh, well, what construction project management training courses are out there? And I don't know, I just really struggled to find anything really suitable in it. Slowly over the years, I did a diploma of project management. I then decided that I was going to try and build my own course, and just started from there, building courses and getting like input from a whole lot of mentors I have, and compiling all the information, and yeah, produce this suite of construction project management training courses that are much more tailored towards the job you're expected to do rather than the theory.
Yeah, definitely. That's common. I mean, there's a big gap, right, between
Yeah.
kind of what's out there through traditional education and then, kind of the real world
And like,
experience is the two sides of
yeah,
the
it's not
coin.
necessarily a criticism of uni. I mean, uni is different, I think, in what you're expected to learn. It's
Hmm.
much more generic. Like, someone studies electrical engineering, there's 1,000 different jobs they could do. I guess I just found for me that what I'd studied at uni wasn't really applicable, but then there wasn't really a good place to learn the skills that
Yeah.
I thought I needed.
Yeah, definitely. No, I didn't go through uni, like, but similar experience as far as like finding really good relevant information. And I think like kudos
Yeah.
to you to like seeing that gap and being able to provide, the courses and training programs and stuff that you have now where you can greatly speed up the process of someone who doesn't have that real world experience, or maybe who has project management experience but maybe doesn't have like that kind of formal training or education in
Yeah,
these
for
things.
sure.
And that's the beauty of the online courses is you can get, like you said, with this guy that had explained estimating to you, it probably took him, I don't know, maybe 30 minutes or an hour, and it's just like key concepts. And just with him, it's like an expert is someone who can take something really complex and really big and make it
Yeah.
simple, right? And that's the beauty of someone who's done something for a long time or understands the concepts, is they can take something that's like project management. It's a huge field and there's a lot to know, but kind of streamline it
And
into relevant information that's useful in a
the
practical sense.
other thing I find is, for me, it's really hard to learn something unless I've got a problem I'm trying to solve. Like,
Mm.
if someone had tried to explain that same concept of estimating to me at uni, I don't think it would have really meant anything. But because I was
Mhm.
doing estimating at that time,
Yeah.
learning the theory helped improve what I was doing so much. And like, I feel for me, when I've got like, I need a problem to be solving to apply when I'm learning. I think that's what's great about the online courses, is when you come across a problem, you can find a short course that fills in that knowledge gap.
Yeah. great point there too, with the knowledge and the training, and certain things may not land or resonate with someone until they're maybe in a certain situation, or until you kind
Yeah,
of reach a certain level. Like I know that with for me with books is like I read a really good book and then I read it again, a couple years later, and there's like new stuff in it that
yeah.
now I understand better because I'm in a different situation or have a different experience, or what have you, and you can pull out new
Yeah,
stuff. So
it's definitely like the right place, right time
mhm.
with
Yeah.
learning, I think.
For sure. And so our audience out there, they're project managers, they're business owners, they're people that, have lots of projects going on every day. What's
Yep.
some of your advice as far as like ways that they can improve project management or look at project management to just make things run smoother?
Well, I think the simplest thing in terms of managing a project, I think the simplest thing you can do, which is easier than, I guess, going to all the effort to learn and apply the theory, is if you get a good project management software tool, it forces you to work through those workflows of procurement or cost management. It
Mhm.
forces you to adopt those processes. So
Yep.
I think probably finding a good software tool is the easiest way to do it. And then I guess the second part of that is to find the software tool, but then to actually use it. Because the other thing I've noticed in at least a lot of my experiences working for construction companies is there's these great software tools out there, but if you don't use it, you're not really getting the benefits from it. For example, if you look at quality management, there's lots of software tools out there that help with quality management, but doesn't, and to a certain degree, I don't think it really matters which one you use, but if you don't use one, then you're
Mhm.
worse off rather than finding the perfect one. So
Yep.
I think the easiest thing in terms of integrating like project management processes, I guess, is two parts. Like understand the theory to a base level and how it relates to the objectives of the project, and
Mhm.
then find some sort of tool that makes it really easy for you to follow the process.
Yeah, I think what you said there with like the tool is one thing, but then how to use it and use it effectively is another. And I think
Yeah.
that's a struggle for a lot of companies out there, and project managers is there's the tools available, but maybe there isn't like a training process in place of how to use the software.
Yeah.
Or because it's new to them, they are unsure of like how to implement it, or use like their existing process, because every company has a system and a process, even if it's all in the owner's head or all in the project manager's head, and then using the software to actually make the process better.
Yeah.
And
And I think people undervalue how hard it is to set up a project in a software. I think there is a real skill to that because I'm working on that exact phase of a
Mhm.
project now. And
Yeah.
there's so much you have to think about to
Mhm.
set up the work breakdown structure
Yeah.
properly, set up your cost codes, all those things is like, it's a real art.
Yeah, definitely. And I think another thing too is when people are used to not really using too much software, like you can do things faster because like if you're just doing spreadsheet or everything's in your head,
Yeah.
like it's easier because but you're like the bottleneck essentially, and you can only manage so many
Yeah.
projects that way. And then of
No,
course you
that's a
don't have
good
all
point.
the other things like scheduling and reporting and job costing and all that other stuff that a good project management software will have. So that's something that I know with my clients is always a challenge, is if they're used to not really having a good software in place, or they're just using spreadsheets or things like that, and then we get them onto a
Yeah.
project management software, we can get it set up for them. That's fairly straightforward process, but then having their team implement it, having the right operating procedures, getting them trained on it, and then actually using the software. And at first it's going to be tedious, it's going to be difficult because they're new to the software, but the benefits greatly outweigh that initial sort of
Yeah.
implementation stage.
I guess you have the upfront cost of learning how to use the software, changing how you do things, but you get the the long running benefits of everything being easier. And no, it is, I never really thought about it before, but it's a good point that if you're using a software, it's easier to outsource the process or get someone else trained up on how to do it, as opposed to having everything in your head. Like, for example, estimating if you have all the production rates for different activities, you just know them, then
Yeah.
it's hard to get someone else to do it.
Yeah, so with the like having good software in place, it also enables the team environment and enables a company to grow farther, right? If everything's
Yeah,
just sort of like off the cuff and everyone's doing things differently, and there's no like one system that everyone's using, one software everyone's using, then you're really like limited to the amount of people you have and the consistency within your business. You're unable to grow essentially. So that's what some of these software solutions will definitely do, for companies and project managers. What are some of the challenges maybe you've had, before running up a project, or that you find like project managers run into a lot? What are some of the challenges in projects?
Yeah, I think to me, the challenges don't necessarily originate from the projects. They originate from the market, because the construction
Okay.
market is so competitive and it's such a
Mhm.
lowest bidder wins environment. From the get-go, like say you're tendering for a government job, you're tendering for something with a private developer.
Mhm.
They get three quotes. They choose the lowest quote with the most aggressive schedule. And then from the get-go, the project doesn't have enough money in their budget and doesn't have enough time to do the project. So it's not, to me, those, a lot of the challenges, at least I've seen on projects, start in the tendering phase or the work winning phase, where to win the work, you almost have to commit to unrealistic timeframes at an unrealistic cost
Mhm.
and take on unrealistic risk.
Yeah.
Then I think that's probably the biggest challenge. And then the other one I think is often a challenge on at least the type of projects I've been involved in is they're often quite technically complicated projects. So there'll be electrical, mechanical, civil, and at least in my experience, the people who are really strong technically often aren't really strong commercially or cost savvy. So I think having people who at least bridge the gap between understanding the technical engineering or construction side, as well as people who understand the contracts and the money, I think it's really
Mhm.
important. Like, for example,
Yeah.
you see often a lot of like variations from subcontractors will get through when commercially they probably shouldn't have, but it's
Mm.
because the contracts people don't really understand the technical justification for it. I see that a lot as well. So I'd say it's probably those two things. The biggest challenge is that the market is incredibly competitive, so it's always the lowest bidder wins. And then
Yeah.
projects are really technically challenging, and
Mhm.
the people who understand the technical nuances often aren't the ones thinking about the money and the contracts.
Yeah. Yeah, I think a lot of like as far as like the management of the project, I mean, it really comes down to communication and how well people communicate.
Yeah,
But there is that kind of like overhanging cloud, if you will, of yeah, generally the lowest bid is gonna, often get the project with the most aggressive, timeline, which kind of really sets the project up, like you said, unrealistic forecasting to some
yeah.
degree.
And it just puts so much pressure on the project team. If, for example, every package you're letting is over budget, or it just creates all this additional work, this additional effort, proving why this is the best possible price. And then even in that situation, if you're choosing, say you get three quotes for a subcontract package and you're choosing the cheapest one, it's probably the subcontractor who's factored in variations during construction. And so from the get-go, you've chosen a contractor who's planning on making their money through variations. So you end up with all these issues down the track with that same subcontractor, and it all starts from
Mhm.
not having enough money in your budget to begin with. So I think that it's such a low margin industry. There's not a lot of room for mistakes. And
Mhm.
the other thing I think is things can go much worse than they can go well, at least what I've seen in construction.
Yes.
Like it's much easier to blow your budget significantly than to make a lot of money.
Yeah. Yeah. Usually you don't get praised for a project that runs well. I mean, you might, but generally when things go well, people are like, it's expected. But when
Yeah.
things go wrong, then, that's what everyone hears about and everyone gets stressed about. So definitely a bit of an imbalance there for sure. And yeah, typically, like you said, like subcontractors, they want to put a competitive bid in. So generally, I mean, the ones that are super low probably either not done a great job or forgetting things or just underbid because they're not busy
Yeah.
or something like that. But then there's all sorts of issues later on that can come up from that. So I mean, you've helped over I think 20,000 students now through your courses, which is amazing. What are some of the like the key skills? Like if someone's looking to get into project management or maybe maybe they're starting out as a project manager, what are like some key skills that every project manager should work on or kind of needs to be successful?
Yeah. I think the first one is, and in a lot of ways, it's not really spoken about a lot, but I think it's really important to have good technical skills, to understand how things are built, to understand like the physical construction side of things. Because I've
Hmm.
never seen a really good project manager who hasn't also had a really good understanding of how things are built. I think it's really hard to be a strong project manager if you don't have a good technical foundation, or you don't have a good understanding of how things are actually built. Different construction methodologies, have worked on a lot of similar projects. That's the first one I'd say. The second one, I think, as you mentioned before, is communication. I think people who work well with other people, they're good at motivating their teams. They're good at surrounding themselves with people who like care about the objectives of the project, care about the outcomes, show accountability. So I think like teamwork and communication can go a long way. So I think if you have, say, someone who's strong technically, understands how to build things, cares about the outcomes, and is good at working well with others, then you've gone a long way at
Hmm.
being a good project manager. And then the final one I'd say is like cost estimating and management. So focusing on money, how much things cost, where you're spending money.
Hmm.
I think if you have those three skills, you'll go a very long way.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, technical like side of things definitely a must have, and I think that's a challenge for a lot of kind of newer project managers or people that are new to project management. Is they maybe understand like parts of things are built, but not kind of like the whole
Yeah,
project. And I know I've like for myself too when I started projects, it's like my background was carpentry, so I'm good at like the structure and carpentry and stuff like that, but not
yeah,
like finishing and some of maybe the rough trades and stuff like that was kind of new to me. So like you have to rely on your subcontractors that they know what they're doing. But
yeah.
once you have experience of like which things to look out for and kind of like how they do their project and how their kind of piece of the project incorporates to the full scale or scope, it definitely gives
Yeah, I
you
suppose
better ability.
yeah, it's a good point with the building projects particularly. There's so many different trades and you're very reliant on information and support from them as well. Which I guess is why communication is such an important part of it because
Yeah.
like I guess yes, it's important to understand how things are built and have worked on similar projects, but you're also always going to have to need to ask for input from people and work with
Yeah.
a
Yeah, I think having like, yeah, communication, I think a lot of it boils down to that, even from the get-go of communicating like why your pricing is the way it is or why your bid is, a certain way, your schedules, communicating with sub trades, as we mentioned, but communicating with stakeholders, clients, other team members. There's so much. And I find if you have strong communication, it kind of smooths out some of the issues or challenges that come up throughout a project, like
yeah,
especially clients if things inevitably won't go well on a project. There's generally always
no.
something that comes up or something that got missed or unforeseen circumstances or what have you. But if you can communicate that to the client and let them know about it kind of sooner than later, and then like it just goes a long way with still maintaining that strong relationship, even if certain things maybe didn't go as planned or as expected, and things like that. So definitely a lot going on there. And then as you mentioned, the financial management of projects again, so super important. I don't know how many contractors I talk to, and it's like they finish a project and it's like, where'd all the money go? Like these were our
Mm,
margins or
yeah,
our profit and markup and all that kind of stuff. And but there's no money in the bank account or I think I made
yeah,
money, but they really kind of don't know after the project. So could you maybe dive into that
yeah.
of like
Someone
how you'd manage the financial? Go ahead.
someone gave me a good bit of advice, which was learn to see money. When you walk around and look at things, think, oh, how much does this cost? How long does this have to be here?
Mm.
What's when
Yeah.
can we get rid of this? I think
Yeah.
it's an important because ultimately you're there to make money. So
Yeah.
if you're controlling your budgets, you understand how much things cost, then in a lot of ways you're also controlling the schedule, the quality, a lot of
Mhm.
these other domains.
Yeah. Yeah. I find like scheduling is obviously super important, having accurate schedules, and having contingencies in there and things like that for financial management. And then what you said too of just kind of like, I find like the mindset of like project management is you kind of want to keep the foot on the gas pedal a little bit. Not that you want to like rush and there's mistakes that come with trying to move things too fast, but not like getting into the habit of like, oh, we don't have this, so we can't do this right now, or we need to wait on this to get that done. Always like trying to make sure there's progress happening, kind of no matter what
Yeah.
is going on, and just look for ways
And
to keep that schedule tight, even if something is maybe delayed, but what else can we do in the meantime? Things like that.
yeah, and I think a lot of that comes to that keeping the foot on the gas pedal, as you said. It's
Mhm.
a lot of it relates to accountability and caring about the outcomes. And
Mhm.
that's another thing I've seen in really strong project managers is they care about the project being successful. And sometimes, I guess, more with working at bigger companies, sometimes
Mhm.
projects develop this culture of just blaming everyone else and
Yeah.
not like, or something's always someone else's fault, and they've always got an excuse for why something went wrong. When I think
Mm.
you see a lot of really strong project managers and people who do well in the industry, I think they always care about, they don't necessarily care about like why something's gone wrong. They care about fixing it and correcting it and but what's best for project.
Yeah, for sure. So as far as like scheduling projects, how would you go about like creating schedules and maintaining the scheduling part of a project?
Scheduling, yeah, scheduling is, I think there's a couple of different roles scheduling plays in a project. So for example, if you're working in a pre-construction phase, then, and you're working on a tender and the client has a specific date they want to finish the project by, then the schedule is really a tool you use to work out whether it's achievable to complete the project scope by then. In that case, you want to do more of a proper, whether you use Microsoft Project or something like Primavera, but you want to do a detailed, proper breakdown of the schedule based on the information you have. And you can use something more like critical path scheduling will work better in that environment. But then I find when you actually move into construction, this has at least been my experience, that the master project schedules sometimes become a bit irrelevant, and the traditional ways people do scheduling doesn't really seem to translate well to coordinating and managing works on site. And I think
Mhm.
I like much more the lean construction model where it's all about pool planning and thinking, working backwards from, say, the date you want to achieve and constantly asking for this activity to begin, what needs to be ready for it? For this activity to begin, what needs to be ready for it? And you sort of work backwards from the finish date. So, for example, if you're pouring a concrete foundation, you need the surveyor to have marked it out. You need the excavation complete. You might need compaction tests. And I find that working back from the next activity, thinking everything that needs to be ready to allow this to happen, it helps
Yeah.
me plan much more effectively than, which I think is different to scheduling in the pre-construction or tender phase where you're producing an overall project schedule. You want to make a Gantt chart in something like Microsoft Project that contains all the activities. It might be a
Yeah.
couple of hundred lines. And I think that's very different to scheduling during the construction phase where it's much more about working backwards for the next activity, and that concept of pool planning, asking what has to be done to enable this then to happen.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's a golden insight right there and very interesting of working backwards. And I don't know how many times got to a project or we're working through something and you get to a certain stage of the project and realize like, oh shoot, we didn't have this in place, or we forgot
Yeah,
to get that, and now our inspection isn't complete, or we don't have an inspection, we didn't schedule it
yeah,
at the right time, and now there's this break in the schedule because some small thing got missed, or inevitably you've gone to like finishing stage and maybe you've got to open up walls because again you missed some quality check, or some small piece of the
yeah.
project maybe wasn't in the schedule because the schedule is not going to contain necessarily everything. It's more like blocks of tasks and things like that. So
Yeah. Yeah, I think
working
that's
backwards.
it's definitely that scheduling, what I think people traditionally think of scheduling, building a big schedule in Microsoft Project is very different to what actually works on
Mhm.
site. And I
Yeah.
just really like the framework of thinking what has to be done for this next task to begin and working backwards rather than working forwards. I think for me that really helps a lot. And the other thing I think is important with scheduling is you have to be pessimistic. You can't be optimistic. You have to always think what can go wrong,
Mhm.
what happens if it rains, what happens if this gets delayed, what happens if and like it makes it. I don't really know the answer to this question, but I think in some ways the people who end up managing projects really well stress a lot about them because they're
Yeah,
always asking
definitely.
that question. I don't know if that's good for people's happiness and wellness,
Mhm.
but
Yeah. Well,
sometimes I
project
think you have to
management
do that.
is stressful, and it's like people that manage projects, they've got kind of another level of ability just to deal with shit, coming at
Yeah,
them left, right, and center. Sometimes things go well, and generally once you've been like the more experience you get, and especially when you've got really good like trades, like subcontractors and people you work with, and like you've worked with companies before and stuff like that, it becomes a lot easier, and you kind of get in a groove. And hopefully, like depending on the business, if you do similar type of projects, generally it goes easier instead of like doing lots of different types of things. But yeah, it's definitely a challenge, and there's a lot of stress. But I like how you made the distinction between like, your pre-construction planning where you build out a Gantt chart and you kind of fill everything out. And what I've found is like to have buffers in between trades, like always add some buffers in there
yeah,
because I'm naturally an optimistic person. And when I see it in my brain, it's like, I expect good things. The future is
yeah,
bright, but inevitably, things come up and stuff happens. So having some buffers in the schedule, I found is really important because first it gives you a little bit of clearance, so you're not quite as stressed, but also because depending on the size of the project, you have too many people stacked on top of each other, too many, trying to. I see this a lot, especially in your ends of projects when you're trying to meet deadlines or meet schedules, and you've got all kinds of trades there and different people, and it kind of just becomes a little bit of a mash of people that are going to be not as effective because they don't have the space they need to do their job properly, and then inevitably they're not happy either, and stuff like that. So
yeah. It's a hard one. I feel like there's that. Can't remember the principle, but it's time or something takes as long as you allow for it. And I
yeah.
feel like that happens a lot with project completion dates, where everyone knows there's a date the project has to finish.
Hmm.
It trickles along constantly missing milestones, and then all of a sudden at
Yeah.
the end there's this crazy rush to finish, and people get thrown at every task, and
Yeah.
you blow your budgets.
Yeah.
And in some ways I think the way to combat that is to have some hard interim milestones that people treat seriously, because people
Mhm.
always treat completion dates seriously, but if you have a series of milestones along the way and those milestones are treated just as seriously, it's a good way of like controlling progress and ensuring that you're not deviating too much from the plan.
Yeah, great points there for sure. And I think as the project manager, like there's always that concept of, what if there's a certain level that you treat something of importance, the people that you're explaining it to who are also part of the project, the importance for them is going to be less. So if you're at like this is like pretty important, the subcontracts like it's maybe a little bit important. By the time it gets to the subcontractors like carpenters or tradespeople that are actually on the ground with, doing the job, it's kind of been diluted and they're just there kind of showing up for the day and looking to go home at five
Yeah,
o'clock. So it kind of relates back to kind of keeping the foot on the gas pedal of like sometimes it's like,
yeah,
oh, these people are just a couple days late, right? So we'll just extend a couple days and maybe the next trade can catch up or whatever, or you try to mash some stuff together. But if you don't like kind of maintain your schedule from the beginning, it just continues to kind of bloom and
yeah.
expand until you get months down the road, and now you're a couple weeks out, and because those couple of days have added up here and there, and you're
I
no
think
longer making schedule.
that example with the subcontracts is, I think, a really good one, because the idea to combat that is that you have durations or time frames in the contracts, and I think that is comes from in the pre-construction phase having a very good understanding of how you're going to deliver the project, and then transferring that responsibility to meet the schedule to your subcontract. So you have to put an upfront investment in the procurement process. And at least projects where you have a lot of different trades, a lot of different handovers between trades, defining that in a scope of works, I think, is really, really challenging.
For sure. Kind of backtracking a little bit to where you're talking about scheduling, projects, stuff like that. You talked about kind of working back. One thing that I often used for like which materials or tools or stuff that needed to be there was kind of like do a mental walkthrough of the project of like
Yeah.
or a task. And often I find that'll bring up stuff too that maybe you've forgotten and things like that. As far as like you mentioned software and systems and stuff like that, could you maybe dive into like some of the systems part of how that incorporates into project management or how you use software and technology to facilitate, better project management?
Yeah. When I say a system, like I don't necessarily think a system has to be like fancy and software based. For example, quality management, at least on major projects, everyone talks about doing things on iPads and check sheets on iPads and things. And
Mhm.
in a lot of ways, it's been hard to implement because doing things by hand on paper actually works really well. And so like when I think like systems can be really simple. For
Mhm.
example, a system for a quality management system, you could have an Excel work breakdown structure, a folder structure on Google Drive that you save your different inspection and test plans in. And then you have your check sheets and quality documents that people fill out in the field.
Mhm.
So in some ways, I think systems, the best softwares I've used are really easy to use. They allow you a lot of flexibility in how you use them and how you tailor them to the specifics, which I think is a challenge why the software is hard to roll out on construction projects because every project is slightly different, but it's
Mhm.
slightly different in an important way. For example, like you might be working on a project and the quality management system you typically use on this project, the client wants you to use their system.
Yeah.
And it seems like such a minor detail, but it makes how you manage quality on the project completely different.
Mhm.
But I would say like the core softwares that people would need some sort of estimating software where you can because if you Excel is great and Excel is good for sharing estimates and emailing things, but the actual proper estimating softwares, they're just going to prevent you from making silly mistakes or having some formula that doesn't carry through. They allow you
Yep.
to document all your production rates, all your rates for different pieces of equipment, and it should
Mhm.
make estimating a lot faster and easier and reduce the chance that you make a mistake. Obviously, scheduling is something that creating those pre-construction schedules, you need a proper scheduling software to do. It's too difficult to do in
Yeah.
Excel or by hand. So you've used something like
Mhm.
Microsoft Project.
Yep.
Works really well. A document management system is always important.
Mhm.
And document management systems, I guess, because projects produce a lot of drawings, specifications, documents, and those documents also tend to change during the course of the project. You get
Yeah.
RFIs, which changes the detail on a drawing. It's good to
Mhm.
have some source of truth that's maintained with all the key documents. And the other thing a lot of the document management systems allow you to do is record important communication. So if you send a payment claim to a client, then you can document all that. I think that's
Yeah.
quite an important thing.
Yeah, for sure. Those are all like good, parts of a full, complete management suite of software and stuff like that. And what you said about like sometimes paper does work and is effective, and I think especially if it depends on the person, but sometimes just like clicking something on like a tablet or on a computer, it doesn't really have like a big effect because it's so easy sometimes. Where like let's say you're going
Yeah,
through a quality checklist, it's just like check, 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 check. Like
yeah,
it's just so
yeah,
much easier than if you actually have a piece of paper and you're on site and it's like it's like it makes it a little more real almost.
yeah.
Uh,
The other thing I should have mentioned is I love the 3D models, so BIM.
yeah.
Sometimes when you've got a complicated project and
Hmm.
it's so hard to make sense of the drawings,
Yeah,
but if you're
definitely.
looking at it in a model, it's just unlocks another level of it just
Mm,
makes it so easy to understand sometimes because I've worked on a train station where you have all
mhm.
these different services and the structure and an interface with the rail and I
Yeah.
makes like it impresses me that people used to understand all that just looking at looking at
Yeah, you're looking
drawings.
at this like flat paper, right? And there's all this like level
Yeah.
of details and different levels of
And you have to flick through to find like a section view or something, and then you forget which
mhm.
drawing you were looking at. I
Yeah,
think the
definitely.
3D models make things incredibly easy.
For sure. Could you maybe walk us through a successful project that you were a part of and maybe what made it successful or why you think it could be a project maybe that went well or what that didn't go well and some of the like the lessons you learned from running through a project?
Yeah, the most successful project I worked on was the first solar farm I did. And there were definitely challenges to the projects. Coming from an environment where I'd worked on brownfield rail, so you have a lot of stakeholders, there's a lot of pressure. You can only do certain work during rail closures. The
Mm,
projects are really challenging because there's so much influence from the external stakeholders. You're reliant on other people so much. Coming to then working on a solar farm where you definitely have challenges, but a lot of those challenges are in the team's control.
mhm.
You have a field that you're going to build a solar farm on, and it's very much down to you and what you do to manage that project. And I think the main reason I really enjoyed that project was there was just a really good team on it.
Yeah.
It was just an awesome team. Like people
Mhm.
I personally got on with really well, but also people who like everyone took responsibility for their work and they just
Mhm.
like I hate projects where people are always trying to blame someone else for what went wrong and trying to
Yeah.
shirk responsibility. So I think for me, and plus it was an interesting project. So like for me, those two things, those are what make a great project, like a good project environment, interesting project to work on, and then a really good team.
Yeah, for sure. That makes a huge difference to people that you're working with and that you get along and everyone's there
Yeah.
to come together and build a great project and is just, has the ability to recognize that, working together, just things get done a lot better. And for me, it kind of sparked an idea of like, we've talked a lot about the management side of project management and systems and how things come together, but there is like going back to communication, like the leadership aspect of project management too, is where the project manager really, you are the leader on site and you're leading to subcontractors and suppliers and, all these things. And there's actually a kind of a side to project management of leadership as well. And being able
Yeah.
to facilitate those conversations, provide feedback, things aren't going as planned, and also provide feedback when people have done a good job and showing appreciation and kind of facilitating those relationships on site is a big part of it. And leadership to recognize as well that you don't have all the answers, you make mistakes, not being too heavy-handed as far as like pushing people to get stuff done. Like obviously you got to put out that energy but not be like hard ass just trying to cajole people or manipulate them into
Yeah.
pushing them to do things that don't make
I
sense.
think, yeah, it's a really good point. I guess originally what I thought what construction management was, it was driving people on site, like cracking the whip, making sure people are working faster. But then when you see a project that's run really well, it's not like that at all. It's just smooth.
Yeah. Definitely.
Like I think it's not really that cracking the whip driving people. It's just everything's very smooth. People
hmm
come to site, things are ready for them, people
Yep.
do their work correctly, people leave. Like
Yeah.
it's just you just
Yeah, and
don't
I
have
think
all these it's just not chaotic.
yeah, I think the project manager, you set the tone for a project as well. Where I was working with someone who had a good analogy of like you're going out, Saturday night, you're going out to a party at someone's house or whatever. And when you're younger, you probably went to these where you show up at the house and there's like beer bottles everywhere and the place is a mess. And it's just like obviously they don't really care about their house or the apartment or whatever. How well are you going to treat their place when you get there?
Yeah.
Not very well. Then you go to like another person's house, everything's very clean and tidy and organized. How well are you going to treat
Yeah.
their house when you get there? You're going to take your shoes off. You're not going to leave garbage around, right? So having your job sites, organized and clean when a trade or people show up to site, you set the tone and they're going to like live up to that expectation. As
Yeah.
well as like with trades, let's say you have one trade working and then another trade shows up, the past trade's, still not done and what the material that this trade need is not on site or whatever, they're just going to have like a poor experience and it just creates additional friction. So kind of being that
Yeah.
leader of like facilitating and being like the support for the people on site, like making sure like I'm going to have this ready for you, and we're going to get your materials, you're going to get paid on time, like just making sure things flow and run easily. The other
Yeah.
stakeholders and people on the project are just going to be like, they're going to feel that, and then they're going to want to do a good job, and they're going to treat the next people, in that same manner. And like you said, it just kind of has a flow and a rhythm to it, and it
Yeah,
just
in
makes
some ways
I think
it's
it's
not, you're not necessarily directing people, telling them what to do. You're
Mhm.
enabling them to do their job.
Yeah, and there's still going to be like hard lines and times when you need to have conversations with people, but in general, that kind of sets the project up for success. And there's another great analogy of like leadership is kind of like a chain, and the different people or stakeholders is like a chain. If you pull it around, they will follow. So, but if you start to push, the chain just there's no stability there,
Yeah.
and
No,
so
that's
you,
a
you
good
want to
one.
be
Yeah.
you want to be leading from the front and like pulling people in a certain direction, not pushing them from behind to go do things that you might not do. So another great analogy there. So for people to learn more about you and your courses, so you've got your website, Construct IQ. So we'll drop a link in the comments below
Yep.
to your website. There's free courses there. You got tons of great content. So you definitely want to go
Yep.
check that out. And then you've got a YouTube channel as well where you're sharing all kinds of things on estimating, project management, construction management, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, if you're listening, check out the comments or the description, and we'll put links in there. Go get some of that content. Any last kind of thoughts or final words of wisdom that you wanted to chat about, or let the listeners know about?
No, I really enjoyed chatting. It was an interesting conversation. It actually sort of made me rethink when I answered that question about what are the core skills a good project manager needs. I think I'd go back and change my answer, and I'd say that communication and collaboration one I'd put at the top, because I think you're right, that does overcome so many challenges in delivering a project. Just talking to people and solving
Yeah.
problems like that.
Yeah, definitely effective communication. Well, thanks so much for coming on, Tim. You shared a wealth of knowledge, and
Ah,
I got a bunch of insight out of it. So I'm sure the other people watching and listening did too. So thanks so much for coming on.
no, awesome. Thanks.